had to build a modern castle, what are we looking at in terms of that? So I'm thinking like you've got to construct a building that's going to house, say, 200 people. It's got to be siege proof for 6 months, preferably. The only thing I'd say reasonably you don't have to try and defend it from is nuclear bomb. Let's just say if that happens, you're dead. But are we looking at what's the modern equivalent of a castle? Are we looking like an underground bunker, or how's that looking?
I would say you are looking more subterranean, definitely, in terms of because warfare is so very different to the age of castles. You would not build a castle as you traditionally know them, like with a keep, with outer walls, with a moat. None of that, because it wouldn't work in modern warfare. For a start, modern armies do not fight, as we would call it, conventionally. They don't fight. Western armies across the world have uniforms and they have battle tactics, but frequently they're coming up against more guerrilla style types of warfare. And so in terms of fortifications, it's more a case of hunkering down, whether that be bunkers or just very, very tight defenses. But a lot of it would be involving cyber warfare as well. So the dimensions are totally different now to how they were in the medieval period. A knight in shining armor would find how fighting a war today would be completely unrecognizable. You probably wouldn't know what to do.
A castle sort of depends on almost like a chivalric or like rules of warfare in order to work.
Yes, there is that, but bear in mind a castle is built. A castle can't defend itself against aerial warfare, for example. This is how things are so much different. There is that chivalric code, but that chivalric code was only, it's a very good point to make. The chivalric code was only skin deep, bear in mind. They were ruthless as anybody. And castles, as we know them, they're very nice places to visit now. But back in the day, they were tools of oppression to keep the local population in line.
Okay.
So yeah, they're not nice things ultimately.
Did they ever? I know that like trebuchets and stuff like that to sort of like fling things into castles, but did they ever work on like floating people in or flying people in? Like, was there ever? Did they ever? What was the best way of attacking aerially other than trebuchets?
The trebuchets and siege engines, and there are towers that could go up to the walls, and you could go over the battlements that way. But actually, the best way to enter a castle often was digging tunnels underneath. So what medieval miners would do, they had sappers in those days. They would dig lots of mines to go underneath.
What's a sapper? Sorry.
A sapper is a military engineer, and they do things like mining and in the late medieval period, it would have been early explosives, that sort of thing. They would dig under the castle foundations, and the idea was to loosen the walls to make them unstable. And by doing that, they could collapse a section of wall and get in the castle that way. But sometimes, and what's remarkable is, there would be counter miners. Sappers would dig to find each other like moles. And if they met underground, there would be sword battles in these tunnels. It's rumored that Henry V in France, he did a siege, and his miners built a tunnel so huge that Henry V reputedly had a horseback encounter with a French knight in a tunnel. Reputedly, I'm not sure how true it is, but it's a great story. It has elements of the modern about it. You think of mines that's to do with World War I, stuff like that, but these are medieval people going. So underground is the best way to go. Hence why moats are a good idea. That's why you have a moat, to stop miners.
All right, and that's partly what. And the water features is partly what made Kenilworth hold out so long in the siege.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because you imagine if you've got a huge water defense like that can stretch for over a kilometer, you're going to have siege engines that match that length. There were boat attacks, but they failed because you're so much more vulnerable in a boat. So there is evidence of trebuchets being used at the siege, and the trebuchet balls, they fell short. They landed in the lake, and they've since been dug up, and now they're in the barn in Kenilworth Castle. So this is how good the defenses were, and that's how they could hold out for so long. But they're huge things. They're about the size of a dining room table. And they're just made out of solid stone, and you would not want to be hit by them at all. I used to have to clean them with a brush. It felt very odd. Cleaning is like this awful weapon of war. But they're fascinating things.
A failed weapon of war as well. I mean, I don't want to diminish your job, but you were cleaning a something that famously didn't do very well.
Yeah, I know. No, that's why I'm not. You diminish it all you like. It wasn't that it wasn't that highbrow.
What a waste of your time, Tom.
I know.
Which country do you think has the nicest military uniforms?
Oh, what, past or present?
Let's do modern era historically. Two parts.
Oh, well, nicest uniforms. This is not going to. I mean, I'm not a patriotic person, but we do uniforms quite well. I mean, you can't go.
When you said this is not going to be, I thought, don't say Nazi Germany. Come on.
No,
but Hugo Boss?
No, but you can't go wrong with a red coat, and Britain does red coats quite well. I don't know what it is. It's just some, like, there's a nice sheen about it. But weirdly, I always thought, like the Grenadier Guards at the palace, and they have the red coats, but they have the big bearskins. I always thought the bearskins looked a little bit ridiculous. I don't know why. I keep wanting them to wear something out of sharp, like those tall hats.
Yeah.
They're not the bearskins. They're called shakos. I would have thought that's more appropriate, but they just look a bit odd, if that makes sense.
What's the Poldark uniform? The like blue.
You're obsessed with Poldark.
I bloody love Poldark.
You bring up Poldark all the time.
What's a nice like blue and gold or blue and silver sort of a look? Where would I go to find that?
So I'm presuming that's the Royal Navy.
Oh.
Yeah. So Royal Navy uniforms are quite good because they the ones you're talking about from Poldark. This is 18th century.
Say Aidan Turner. Oh no, my connection's gone.
What was the question again? Sorry.
Why does
Laura
so
love
fit,
the sailors
basically?
so much? Why is Hollywood actor, is it Aidan Turner?
Don't pretend you don't
Why
know.
is Hollywood actor Aidan Turner fit? Go on, Tom, let us know.
Well, he's a good-looking bloke.
He's
I don't know.
handsome.
It's all subjective, though, isn't it? I don't know.
That's
I'd have to ask you, Laura. Why is Aidan Turner so fit?
Well, I think it's the military uniform.
I think you like his muscles and face.
I also like his
I'll tell you what,
ass.
there's a couple of lads where I live walk on in military uniform and they do nothing for anyone. I don't think an 18th century sailor would look like, and I'll say it again, Hollywood actor Aidan Turner.
No, I think
Probably
they'd have far
not.
fewer teeth, wouldn't they, and bleeding gums. I don't think they'd actually want to kiss anybody from the past.
Scurvy's not a good look in any historical era.
No, I think if you've been alive in a time that has dental care, it would be very hard to go and live in any other part of history. Like, I think a toothbrush and a face mask to keep other people's breath off would be like one of the first things I'd stick in my bag if I was going in a time machine. See, this is why I'm not that worried about not going down in history, because what's the point in, like, they wasted their lives writing plays and we just study Shakespeare. McIntyre and Jimmy Carr have got it sewn up. I'm not going to try as well just to be some obscure trivia.
I think Ben Jonson would be heartily displeased. But the good thing is, I think it might burst his pomposity. He was famously arrogant. So the fact that people don't know about him. True.
And no one's going to remember him either.
This is true. I mean, I can tell you what Jonson wrote about the castle, and you can see why he was forgotten. He wrote something called "The Mask of Owls" at Kenilworth for King Charles I in the 1620s, which is very, very random because there's no real connection with owls at Kenilworth. So it's all a bit. It's a very forgotten piece of his, but he did write it, and it's not really a play either. A mask is a kind of a weird interpretive performance.
I'm picturing. I don't know if you've seen the latest. Have you seen the later series of Schitt's Creek with the croning? I'm picturing that basically, but with owls.
Pretty much. I think it would have been quite forgettable.
Is it mask QUE?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, not a face mask. It's a MASQ.
Sticking owls to your face.
Yeah.
The theatre at my school was called The Mask.
Oh.
Latimer Community Arts College.
Yeah.
Dreadful school. GCSE French, Chloe Bridgman, I'll name her. She opened a window in GCSE French and lit a fag, and the teacher just went, "Ne pas fumer, Chloe, ne pas fumer."
Oh, wow. Such discipline.
Bad school. Still.
Dizzy heights now, though, Will.
Look at me, fake brick wall.
So is it? How does a castle become ruined while one 6 miles down the road doesn't? Why is Kenilworth trashed and Warwick's pretty much still standing?
It's an interesting question. It's often with castles in England, castles are usually ruined because of the English Civil War, more
Oh,
or less.
okay.
So depending on what side you're on, depending on how well preserved your castle would be. So Warwick was a parliamentarian castle, and
Yeah.
because Parliament won the Civil War under Oliver Cromwell, that's largely why it stayed intact. It's not the only reason, but it's a large part of it. Kenilworth, however, was royalist, and it fell to the parliamentarian troops in 1649, and then in 1650. This is at the end of the war. It's slighted, and that means partially demolished. And so a lot of what you see today is the deliberate partial ruins that
Right.
Parliament did to it, and a lot of it is decay since then. So,
Why
for example,
wouldn't they take it on and have another Parliament castle? Like, I can't imagine
Think of the
winning a
council
war
tax,
and
though.
not keeping all the castles. If I
I know
could.
exactly what you mean, because Kenilworth was actually, in its intact state, a much grander place than Warwick. And
Really? That's incredible.
oh
'Cause
yeah,
Warwick is, for all its flaws, magnificent to look at. Like, it
oh
is
yeah.
wonderful.
I mean, I like to think with Kenilworth, it's more like how you would envision Camelot to be than Warwick would. And to give you a sense of it, it has not just the castle that you see today and in its intact state, but all around it was a huge lake called the Mere. It was the largest man-made water defence in England at the time, and it stretched for a substantial amount. I mean, for example, King Henry V built a private residence on the other side of this lake, and the ruins today there's like earthworks. They're about 1 kilometre away. And so it would have been this huge castle surrounded by a vast body of water. And the castle itself was full of luxurious apartments. It became not just a fortress, but a palace, and deliberately so. And so it would have been, the most opulent castle in the area, for certain. So if I was a parliamentarian commander and I was given Kenilworth Castle to do whatever I liked with, I would have thought, well, I think I'll have this palace all to myself. But it turns out the colonel who did the slighting, what he did, he moved into the gatehouse. He left the gatehouse intact, which is a very small part of the castle. And because he moved in there, it's the only fully intact bit that still exists today. So
What an absolute noob! Who
was
wins
it?
a castle and then lives in the porch?
Name and shame this cuck.
So the naming and shaming, it was Colonel Joseph Hawksworth.
Oh, I don't care for
Sounds
him.
like a
Look at him
good
just
name.
shuffling. Oh, sorry. Oh, a whole castle for little me. I couldn't possibly eat a whole castle. I'll just take the gatehouse.
Well, you'll be pleased to know when Charles II was restored in 1660, Hawksworth was promptly booted out of the gatehouse.
Get
Good.
out the gatehouse, Colonel.
If he got in the castle, he could have defended himself. But I suppose Charles II's men knocked on and went, hello, mate, get out.
Pretty much.